Okay, guys, so we've all seen this kind of accent heading where we've got a bit of a line and some text. And when you go to a mobile view, I'm using the Bricks mobile landscape breakpoint. It comes down to one column with the heading going to the top, and it flips around as you move above that. Now, I want to show you the way I've done this. There's so many ways you can do this. You can use pseudo elements to do this. I'm not using pseudo elements, and I'm going to explain why as I work through it. I think it's a lot more flexible. In a nutshell, I'm using actual elements, I'm using the bricks class system, and I'm using locally scoped variables for this to be extremely flexible. So I'm going to show you 3 examples on the screen, then we're going to break it down and look at how we built this. So here's the first example where that's just using the defaults. So as I get below the mobile landscape breakpoint, it just flips around to the top. When it's above it, I've got a narrow grid column on the left, and the rest of it is this grid column on the right with my content in it. So I go to the next one down, I've got the same kind of thing, but I've got a red to transparent line, and that is using exactly the same CSS, same flipping and everything. And that there is overridden with the bricks UI. So I've changed the background color using the UI. Then I've got another option down here, which is same sort of thing, but I'm overriding these line styles at the ID level by changing some CSS variables, not CSS rules or properties, just overriding some variables to make that different. So I've got 3 examples of using exactly the same code, just overriding those in different ways. So I'm going to show you how that works and hopefully keep it nice and quick. So there's my builder. I'm going to trash all this and start again. I'm going to use my classes that are already there to save us some time. So let's start with a section. And in that section, we're going to add a block, and that block's going to be our grid. So I'll explain the grid a little bit later, but in our grid, we need to have, say, a 20 pixel gap, and I want to have 27 pixels and then 1 FR. That gives us a narrow left column, a gap, and then a full, the rest of it is our right column. Okay, so that's that there. And it's a strange thing in bricks here. If you don't have any content underneath this grid, you don't get the align items to start showing correctly. So let's add our content first. So if we add a div and then a block, and then we'll come back to our grid, and now we can see our line items are set to there. And the reason we want that is we want this is our grid, these 2 columns, we want our content to sit at the top. So we need to align that to the top, and for some reason it wouldn't show me that until I actually added some content underneath that grid. So there's our basic structure done. This block is going to be our content. So let's chuck some basic content in there. I'll put a heading in there and maybe an image. Okay, select an image. Let's pick maybe this one. Let's go with the old truck. Okay, there's our image. And now we need to create our accent divider. Actually, let's chuck a bit of spacing on that content there as well. So I'm just going to put a row gap of, say, 30, just to move these heading and the image apart a bit. And this here is going to be our accent. So it's going to be this accent here. All right, so I've already created the classes, so I'm going to just add the structure and then I'll go through it with you. So if we go into our classes, WPE, I've called it. So when you create classes in Bricks, I always encourage you to prefix your class names with either your initials or your business initials. Mine's WPEZ, so all of mine are WPE. The reason for that, you can use simple names in, like divider. If I created a class called divider, it's likely to clash with something else that's called divider. It's very unlikely to clash if it's called WPE-divider. So that's going to be my first class that I put on there. Now I've also got a rotation class. I'm going to do WPE, which I'll come back to. And this is the WPE divider with a dash dash, which means it's a modifier. We want it to rotate 90 on a desktop. So that's our class we put there. Okay, and what I typically do with naming my structure elements, so I grab the most important class, particularly in this case a BEM block, and I name that structure element. Now I'm going to put all of my CSS on this particular class. So I'm just going to put a bracket CSS just as a little hint that that's where all of the CSS is. Okay, so under that, we need to create a block. So, and we need to create a basic text. Our block is going to be our WPE lines. We're going to use an actual tool. That shouldn't be a block, that should be a div. Convert that to a div. That's going to be our actual line. And we're not using a pseudo, and I'll show you why we're not using a pseudo. Look, the difference between using a pseudo and an element. I mean, Bricks outputs a single DOM element for a div. A pseudo element is still an element, so it's not really adding additional DOM elements to your structure. It's just more accessible doing it this way. So I prefer this. It gives me more control over it. So that div there is going to be my line. So I'm just going to copy that name from that div. And this basic text is going to be my WPE divided text. Copy that. And put that on there so I know that's my structure. Okay, now on there I'm just going to call this maybe original heading. Okay, and there we're done. So that's the first one. So if I save that, come back to my editor, I'm done. So I've got my first one there. No, I haven't, because I haven't changed the grid properly. So this here, so what's happening is with my accent heading, when I get below my mobile breakpoint, a mobile tablet, it's rotating back around, but it's still, the grid is still 27 pixels and then 1FR. So come back to our grid. We need to go to our mobile breakpoint. We need to tell that to be 1FR, mobile breakpoint. Okay, now that's fixed. So at the mobile landscape breakpoint, our heading's at the top. Go to bigger than that and it flips around. So we've got a 27 pixel 1FR. Here we just got 1FR, so it's all on one grid column. Right, so that's that one done. All right, so let's duplicate this. I'll come back to all the CSS soon, but I'm going to duplicate this and show you how we override these things. So here's our second one down here. Let's change the image so we can tell it's different. Maybe we'll pick the mountains or whatever that is. I can't tell from there. There we go, it's an ocean. Okay, so we'll pick that one, and what we're going to do with this one, we're going to override some of the CSS for this. So I'm going to change that title. Text there. I'm going to put override CSS. I'll call it root CSS. This will be our locally scoped variables. Let's come back to where our CSS is and pick our divider. So we're on the divider there. Style. And you see here, I've got a bunch of, and I'll come back to all this, I've got a bunch of variables I'll define. So if we grab those, deselect our class, so we're going to style at the ID level, and then we put those variables there. We only need the ones we're going to override. So this is the second one. Let's say we don't want that to be orange and we want it to be a little bit thicker. So let's make that 10 pixels. Okay, now it's a little bit thicker. We want that to be green. So we've overridden the CSS variables. We made it green. Let's make it longer. So we're going to make that our min width was our min width of maybe 15 rem. So we've got 15, so it's longer on this one. So comparing that, we've got a 6 pixel 10 rem orange, and we've now got a 10 pixel wide green at 15 rem just by overriding these variables at the ID level. Okay. Now let's say for some strange reason we want that to be at the flex start. So we change our vertical line to flex. Okay, we don't want that. We want the flex end. Oops. Okay, save that. Now we've got our original and we've got our overridden one at the ID level. If we bring that up here, go down there, sorry. So it's aligning along that flex row. it's aligning this to flex end, which is the bottom, and it's overridden the color and the size of it. So that's overriding the root variables, okay? All right, so straightforward. Now we're going to duplicate this again. And this time we're going to override these using both. So we're going to use the ID level. I'm just going to make it thicker. All I want there is my line height, will make that 15. So it's thicker. The rest of this, we're going to leave. Actually, let's make it rounded. So we make a 15 pixel border as well. So it's nice and round. So we've overridden two variables at the ID level for the CSS. And that's given us a thicker line with more of a border radius. Okay. Now we're going to override it using the Bricks UI. But with the Bricks UI, we can go to this. Actually, I put that in the wrong place. I should have put that. I'm going to cut that. We should have put that at the ID level here, so it's consistent with everything else. So let's put that at the ID level at the actual block. We'll come down our line, and what we're going to do is we're going to make this one a gradient. So let's pick so at the ID level, let's go to our background. We want to override the orange and make that fully transparent. So now it's fully transparent. And then we want to set a border, a gradient on the background, select some colors. I'm using ACSS here, doesn't matter what you use, just use these global colors. So we'll go from this blue here, add another blue. So set the same color of blue, but this time we're going to set the transparency to none. And you can see that it needs a rotation as well. So come back to angle and we'll rotate it by 90. Okay, so save that and actually just change that title to, so root plus UI. Okay, so now we've got our original, which is just using the standard CSS. We've got a blue line, which is thicker. It's got more of a border radius, and it's got a blue to transparent gradient. We've overridden this by overriding the root CSS, giving us our sizing, and using the UI to give us our background gradient. And then down here, we've got another option where we've overridden at the ID level, we've just overridden the root CSS. So there's three ways of doing the same kind of thing. And what you would do here is you'd set all your defaults on this one. So you come back to the actual class and select the class. And on that class, you set all of your defaults here. So that's what you want the default behavior to be. And then at the ID level or the CSS root, you override these. The other thing is you can also override these at breakpoints. Okay, and also individually. So let's say we're on the this one here, and we've got our line there, and we override the background and the gradient. But what about at the mobile landscape? We've still got the same background there. Maybe we'll flip that. So let's go to the gradient overlay, and let's give it a different gradient. So let's go, we'll pick the same colors. The same colors. Okay, and if we wanted to, we can actually just flip it around with this angle here. Actually, we've got to make that transparent, sorry. So we make it transparent like that. And then in our angle, we might do minus 90 degrees. Okay, so we're going to end up here. is in our larger screen size, it starts from the blue and the transparent part goes towards the title. When we get to our mobile breakpoint, the transparency is on the left, the darker the blue is next to the title because we've flipped it. So we can flip at different breakpoints by using the UI. We can flick at different breakpoints by overriding the variables in the CSS. It's just a really, really cool way of doing it. Okay, so that is in a nutshell the flexibility of it. Let's go to the actual CSS now. So if we look at the WP divider, sorry, everything's got to be at our desktop breakpoint for this. Go back to our WPE divider. There it is there. So we're setting a gap, line width, min line width, line background, line height, border radius, and vertical line as our variables. We want our div here to be a flex row with our gap variable and aligning items to whatever that is. That's all basic stuff, right? I want to set our divider text element to no wrap. The reason for that is that when you rotate, when this rotates around, so if we're here, so the width of this is whatever that width is. When we rotate, that's a 27 pixel wide column. So the actual box is 27 pixels wide. And then we rotate it. What it will do is it'll actually think that it's only got 27 pixels for the text. So it'll just wrap the text around. So what we need to do is tell it to not wrap that text because it only thinks it's got 27 pixels to work with. And by the way, that is a point I'm going to make here. The reason I selected the 27 pixels is once I created the heading and I had a look at one of these and then looked at the computed style, it's 27 pixels. So that's why I wanted the 27 pixel grid up here for my first column. All right, so where do we get to? So that is that. Now the divider line is an actual element, so we're not using pseudos. So we've got to unset our min height because in the bricks editor, it sets on divs, it sets a min height and a min width to 70 pixels. So you end up with a square. We want to not have this mess up in the editor. We're setting a min width to our variable up here anyway. So that there is not going to be a problem for us. And yeah, so that is the CSS. So as simple as that. And then on our rotate 90 degrees, there's no CSS there. And the reason for that is because we're using a simple transform. So I'm just rotating 90 degrees there when we're on our desktop breakpoint. And then we go to our mobile landscape breakpoint, I rotate back to 0. And that's all there is for the 90-degree desktop rotation. Now, as a rule of thumb, if I'm going to do a lot of stuff, like for example on the divider here, if there's a lot of CSS, I pretty much do all of my CSS here. If there's just one or two settings like there is on the divider here, and the UI supports it, I would generally do that using the UI. So it's just a personal preference. I find if you've got too many things set, it's harder to work through the UI and try and find those settings than it is to just do it in CSS here. But that's my personal preference. So, but that's pretty much it. That's how it works. I will probably export this template and link it in the video just so you got something to start with. But that's pretty much how I would do this kind of divider. So I hope you like this. If you do, hit the subscribe, hit the like. Thanks for listening.